Give me a quick mic check, Boomer.
Mic check, mic check.
All right, yeah, we're
Yeah,
looking
we're
good.
good.
Yeah, we're super good.
All right.
Hey, everybody, this is Nate and Boomer. Thank you so much for joining us. We are live at the Hall of Flowers on March 19th. My name's Nate. I am a cannabis science specialist, one of the founders of Bell Costa Labs, as well as a cannabis educator and a root cause analysis expert. Join my good friend, Brian, otherwise known as Boomer. Please let them know what you're all about, brother.
How's it going, guys? Brian Boomer here from Booms Farm. I'm a genetic consultant, and we're here at Hall of Flowers looking at current events and talking about different products, right? Flower, extracts, seeing where the market is at. It's a little bit of a dynamic, right? It's always changing constantly. And we've done some interviews today. It's been interesting to hear some of the point of views, but I think we've definitely got a good grasp of the first day so far. Day 2 is tomorrow. We'll get a little bit better idea, but what's some of the takeaways that you're seeing so far, Nate?
Everybody's in survival mode, brother.
It's very much survival mode. What define that though? What do you mean?
Good prompt right there. Survival mode. I'm talking about everybody discussing what steps they've taken to shift to be able to maintain their business and presence in the cannabis industry while the market continually fluxes and changes, while the conditions that make doing business difficult are continuously evolving. And everybody feels like there are certain impacts that this is making on their various sides of the industry, whether being a grower or manufacturer or in sales or somebody who impacts the industry through international tie-ins. I've seen it all and talked to them and all. Talked to them all, and so far it seems like the only real withstanding kind of notion that I've heard is that the hemp THCA side of things is continuing to grow. And I mean, it's the wild west of cannabis is apparently alive and well in the THCA game.
You shine a light on some new information that we're starting to hear about, and what he's saying is THCA, the acidic component of tetrahydrocannabinol that most of us know as the psychoactive component in weed. When you light it, it takes this raw material that has THCA in it, but when you heat it, it's decarboxylated, and by decarboxylating it, it adds or removes acidic chain
It
and
decarboxylates
the
the
molecule.
carboxyl group. Or
Yeah.
excuse me. Let's back up here. That's not the best way to put it. When you heat THCA or apply energy to it, the carboxyl group breaks off. We
Okay.
call this decarboxylation.
Okay.
And so the
It's
reason
changing
why
the
this is
molecule when you're running it under a chromatograph,
and the reason
basically.
why this is important is because there's an exploited element of confusion inside of cannabis right now, which is, I would chalk it up to essentially a miswriting of hemp laws, which has been taken in a context to assume that THCA, which is the natural raw version of cannabis,
Right.
that's the version of cannabis that grows on
The
the
live
plant,
version of the
right?
plant, yeah.
That's the raw version
Yeah.
of cannabis. THCA, which decarboxylates into the version of cannabis that gets you high.
Right.
And there's this notion that if the plant is full of THCA, which it is, it always has been for thousands and thousands of years at least, right?
Right.
There's this notion that THCA, if the plant is full of that, and if the cannabinoid content is dominated vastly by THCA, in other words, if the total true amount of THC is 99.7% or higher THCA, then it's considered hemp, which is bonkers, really, because all we're talking about is how a small amount of THC decarboxylates naturally once it's on the either on the plant or shortly after it's harvested. And by being able to represent that the delta 9 decarboxylated THC content is low enough to count it as hemp, again, bonkers, because as soon as you smoke it, it all is delta 9. It
Converts.
never was not that condition.
Right.
So this weird exploitation has basically been an effort to call regular cannabis hemp. And what it's done effectively is avoid all sorts of regulations, both with regards to interstate trade limitations, as well as be the need to test and
Right.
control batches. And the whole track and trace system has been essentially diverted from as
Blurry.
well.
Yeah.
So go figure, the people who are doing well enough in this industry or have a healthy business generally are the ones who are pretty much back to black market rules, right? And that's the, unfortunate shortcut that's been built in there. And I say unfortunate because when we start to flux with, then against, then with, then against regulation, it becomes a moving target. Everything becomes an exception, right? And even as certain states around the country start to crack down on this whole THCA equals hemp movement, that just adds, if anything, additional levels of confusion, consumer wise, as well as to the industry as a whole. Go figure what we've now ended up with one more systemic issue
Right.
where people have had this, back door, if you will, by which to move out, cannabis that was going to sell
Right.
and artificially possibly be able to keep certain businesses or certain facilities open that those doors might get closed off in the future. And those are going to be hard changes that we have to deal with again. Hard with employment, hard with regulation. It's keeping this idea and this unfortunate path of least resistance type of mindset that people have utilized in order to exist. It keeps it in this state of flux rather than evolving past it.
Right. And being able to build something that you can actually rely on and know is a actual business model, right? Because now what's happened
100%.
is everybody's had to pivot with the hemp law. Let's go back to that. The hemp bill allows the under 0.3% THC law, and most states have adopted that, and they're allowed to send from hemp license to hemp license facility. And at that point of confusion, people, I think, figured out when things are moved that when you test that, it falls under the THCA or hemp
Let's ask,
law.
what is a hemp license facility? Because last I checked, unless it's something that a particular state's Department of Agriculture
Has
governed, then it wasn't something that was a real thing, right?
which do exist. They are truly growing hemp, and a lot of them are actually growing smokable hemp flower, or some are growing for extract reasons, more for maybe the edibles or topicals that you're seeing probably in the marketplace. Is
Well, if
probably
I
what you're
may, if
thinking.
it's anything other than raw hemp flower, I don't think the notion. Yeah, sorry, my lighter is absolutely dying here while I'm trying to make a point. Here, one more
Yeah,
chance.
there we go.
One more go. Thank you.
There we go. Teamwork.
All right.
Start.
Well, with this new superpower we found, let me try
It's been a windy
a
day.
more aggressive approach. Yeah.
So don't mind the wind tricks here.
All right, I appreciate that, brother.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
So okay, so you're saying artificially what?
All right, that's like, if that's not a contemporary stoner version of Blood Brothers, I don't know what it is, man. All the way.
Oh yeah, Mike.
Hopefully this stays lit now,
But yeah, so going back to the marketplace, artificially has changed the playing field, right? So now we're talking to
100%.
people are actually walking around saying, "Oh, I'm doing good, but I'm doing THCA. That's where I'm
Thank
killing
you,
it."
Dunks, by the way.
Oh yeah.
La Pina.
Yeah.
Love it.
That's
So
beautiful.
good. So good.
But so back to that. So if that's what some of these guys are pivoting now, whether it's hemp licensed or not, and of course subject to regulations, it is skewing the market because guys, for example, here in California and other regulated states are paying the taxes, they're paying the high cost per square foot, the licensing fees, all that cost, and then they're not selling it because the market is coming to, I don't want to say a bottom, but just above production costs is pretty close.
1,000%. So, it's, again, I called it a weird flux, but it's this nature of what is survival mode. And to move past this into some more technical thoughts, a moment ago, I mentioned that the facilities themselves aren't necessarily hemp facilities. If I'm not mistaken, most, at least here in California, if you're something that's considered an official regulated hemp facility, that only exists with grows. It means if you render it into any form, then it's not something that's state regulated, even within the state's own hemp program. The state will, at least here in California, only regulates that it's below the 0.3% total THC and therefore qualifies as hemp. Now, when we say total THC, that's a little bit of a throwback to earlier in this conversation because we were looking at THCA and Delta 9 THC being reviewed differently, right? Like being considered like they were different chemicals. The intent, and you'll even find it written into the hemp laws. You'll even find mentions of total THC being under 0.3%, which I think is safe to say that was the original direction that the definition of hemp was meant to fall under
Right.
this very low threshold of total amounts of THC, meaning it was dominantly a CBD or likewise
Another
alternative
cannabinoid,
product.
non-psychoactive. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we've got this whole kind of intent versus how it was used, which is really interesting. I mean, it's Prop 215 again, like to make that comparison. It's Prop 215 all over again. You know, what did it mean to have a collective and a caregiver relationship? And that was turned into straight up branding for products. I'm not complaining. That's
Right.
what has allowed the industry to evolve to this
Right.
point here. But that's not what the original intent was, and we can see that. And the distinction between what the original intent was and what it became ended up turning into a big deal that turned the idea of regulations or your operation being rated into a moving target, right? That's not good. That's what we sought to evolve past and grow past.
Right.
But go figure, because of loose laws again and poorly written laws, we're right back in the same place, right?
So we just had an interview with Sivan, and he was talking about that regulatory agency and lack of communication. And you were saying, you know, even in the educational piece that we're trying to do is get with government agencies and others to have them understand the manufacturing, extraction, cultivation challenges, fire departments, you know, and not to say politically here, but it's more for, of course, lobbying. There's companies that have interest in lobbying in certain directions, but from a true representation,
you could say this in so many different ways, even beyond cannabis. But how ludicrous is it that the people who make so many of the laws and restrictions that impact us and our livelihood have virtually no idea what the fuck they're talking about?
And that's where I'm getting at, is that we should be able to have some sort of level of input to give them that insight. But at this point, it's kind of gone, you know, on unread, right? At this point, now we're getting raised taxes here in California. You see different regulatory policies across different states. So now people have left California to other states that are going to be more favorable. I mean, it's the same thing with any business. Certain counties and certain states have more favorable business opportunities, and those businesses will flock there.
That's absolutely true. I can't ignore that, and that's become part of the dynamic in our industry. Is what it means to go into survival mode, really. And isn't that, you know, just to loop around to what we've heard here at Hall of Flowers,
right?
A lot of things dealing with survival mode. There are some brands, and I love working with these guys, that are fortunately flourishing. But the size of the market, the barriers to entry for new brands, the level of failure. I mean, shit, is the level of failure in cannabis now higher than like restaurants in their first year kind of thing? Like,
I mean, they said what it was 80% of licenses didn't renew this year in California.
Yeah,
80% is a high number.
One out of, one out of five succeeding sounds about on.
And the ones left may or may not be
the hardest of businesses. Yeah.
You know.
So, all interesting points. So, what would you say about the good sides of Hall of Flowers? What have you enjoyed seeing? What have, outside of maybe everybody reflecting on the realistic concerns within the industry, what are some of the more promising things you've run into, technology-wise or otherwise?
You know, it's only day one. We've only gotten to tour, half or more of it, and seen a lot of, vendors and booths, and ran into a lot of people, and what I can say is that, hopes are still high. There are people that are still here like us that are looking to pivot and still provide a service and value add in different areas.
All of my same friends are still here. A lot of, you mentioned pivoting. A lot of people are finding themselves in different roles.
We're being honest with ourselves and where the situation is. And that's part of this conversation is, hey, where is the market now, and where is it going to go, and how can we we provide the solutions together. And it has cut out a lot of the middlemen and not all of the fluff and the nonsense, and it really is just kind of a core value, revenue driver for a lot of these companies that's really left.
Yeah, I agree. So I've seen, there are a lot of people jumping into the whole merger, which was one of your predictions too that you made, into the whole merger, level of survival,
Consolidation. Yeah.
consolidation. Technology is coming up. I'm wondering
AI.
I'm wondering how that's going to impact things further because, in general, the creation of cannabis products isn't going to be impacted by AI. Maybe certain things streamline, like marketing and certain things like that.
Cultivation. AI. Well,
Cultivation AI. Well, I'm a big fan of just in general, whatever your favorite AI might be at that time. If you're able to upload an output, say a spreadsheet output,
that too. The data
being
driven decisions. Yeah, data
100%,
driven decisions. Yeah.
that's a neat area to go. And it seems like that's something that people are getting more comfortable with.
Yeah.
And I hear more versions of that being used in resourceful ways than ever before. But I guess that's the nature of something as novel as AI is that's, every time you turn around, what's new, right?
Well, and these businesses are essentially learning to adapt, and then they're overcoming those challenges with this new technology. And I'm always an advocate of running lean and mean, and know where your cash flow is. And a lot of these technologies, although it's an extra cost and investment, I think that the return is probably going to make sense because you're going to be offsetting. The AI can tell you so much more in terms of irrigation strategy or your yield outputs or what's your sell-through rate, your processing costs, like all that stuff that we take forever to have to analyze spreadsheets that you may or may not even be doing accurately. It gets rolled up into a report you can look at weekly with your team.
Hey, brother, what if we feed the whole THC algorithm, and people who want the highest THC ever, what if we feed that through AI and it tells people that they really just need to buy a lot of different stuff and really need to diversify and
Wait, so you run that
THC and all
prompt?
that? I'm going to go home and do it and see what happens. I really do want to see, as people hopefully utilize more technology, let's just suggest that we're going to be able to find aspects of the plant which can be at this current time more broadly explored. It would be nice to have more importance put on different volatile compounds outside of terps and stuff like that, different cannabinoids even. I would like to see what it means to go beyond a whole market driven by THC area and level. I feel like
Right.
people being informed is the way to make that happen. And I mean, although I wouldn't say count on a computer and AI to teach you solely, if that's an idea that's able to get out and be communicated to others more broadly, more palpably, if you will, I'm all for it.
And that you asked earlier about what technology or equipment maybe am I seeing here, and that was one or two things that I've already noticed immediately with some services geared towards retail and brands, analyzing their sales and their competitors, whether it's live on weed maps, and the AI systems go similar for, tracking and production software for manufacturing. It could be, cultivation based, it could be vape, extracts, and that stuff is going to help analyze their throughput, right? Their yields, what raw material started and how did it turn out, right? Other than that, I mean, the technology in terms of grow space in general, and I think what's supporting here, there's some packaging machines, there's some grow machines, that's being implemented, but
may
nothing.
I ask here real quick, folks? So for what you do with genetic procurement and genetics get procured, genetics get sent to various places.
Right.
I've seen a few technologies here that support the ability for you to electronically track where genetics are being requested from and where they can go to. What does that type of system mean for what you do and going forward?
Anything, I mean, I'm utilizing AI and virtual assistants in other ways, and remote situations for my business as well. And so AI being able to give me a level up of, hey, this is where the demographic for what you're selling is at, in different states or counties and cities for that matter. That's a huge advantage for us. So for me, it's ultimately two things: is that the market is telling us, hey, we need to know what strain and where it's being grown or need to be grown. So every state, every county essentially can have a little bit different of a market need. But here in California, primarily, it's say purple candies or gas. And we've talked about this, but then say New York is really known. Sour diesel, right, has been a popular strain, although it across the board
Bless those New Yorkers, man.
dude, it's
Keeping the diesel alive.
great strain. But here, we talk about lack of diversity. I mean, there is diversity here, and a lot of the brands trying to put out good quality and stuff that we think might be good, brand recognition for them. But ultimately, we talk to the wholesale guys, and they still say a lot of it's that purple candy. I mean, you're in the lab, you see a lot of different products. You still see the diversity of the brands, or what are they putting out right now?
I don't see much diversity, but that's not a surprise.
Really?
Right? What trends is what dictates what people are buying and hence what people want to grow because everybody feels like they're in survival mode. So
That's what pays
I
the bills,
guess,
I guess.
if I had to name the segment, it's what we keep coming back to. That's a great question, but it's dictated by survival mode. And what survival mode is in this case, in every case, is what people need to do in order for what they perceive to survive. Now, the issue is that it becomes a systemic concern if it's done incorrectly. And I'd say it's done incorrectly here. For instance, here in New York and other places, THC is what reigns buying decisions. It shouldn't be the case. It hurts companies. It hurts grow operations who don't support or who don't specialize rather in high THC. And so rather than have this awesome diversity and varied levels of experience that are readily available within cannabis, you see everybody growing the same thing. If anything, the lab is a step closer to this singularity that so many people don't realize is happening in real time. When you consider that everybody's going after high THC, that means virtually every strain is an OG or building blocks of an OG. That's what tests the highest, generally speaking. And so exactly. So like GMO exactly. If it's been said between you and I, but if you want to only hit something close to 30 every time, all you have to do is grow GMO. Wait, what's that you say? Nobody wants to buy GMO, but it's the highest testing strain pretty much. So yeah, exactly. So people even understand the reality of how it's away from the experience. It's away from what people want when they smoke cannabis. I mean, no wonder so many people get lied to through the lab testing process and are okay with getting lied to. No,
Perpetuate that lie.
it just gives a chance. If anything, I mean, it's weird, but it's the only chance that generally low testing strain, which could be plenty amazing, give me an old school kush, right? It's the only place where an old school strain will actually maybe come up, as if somebody, they found somebody to lie about testing scores, and then you actually get something that's testing in the teens, falsely testing in the 30s. Yeah,
Higher.
I mean, it's hopefully, that happens less these days, but, to calm down from that point, it's not as bad, but people still wouldn't understand a good strain that only tests in the teens in general. Like, if, it's why that escapes people, even though it's so obvious. Like, let's play this quick game. The best beer you ever had wasn't the highest in alcohol. The best coffee you ever had wasn't the highest in caffeine. The best dessert you ever had wasn't the highest in calories. Well, maybe actually that might line up, but
That's what you're looking for.
exactly. And that's, and it go figure that there's versions of things that are delicious that are inherently not high in calories. So there are things that you can enjoy on every end of the spectrum and only hyper focus on a certain thing. Now that is unfortunate because now you're focusing on only certain chemical profiles that do that thing. And do I see that on the lab side, to answer your question? Yes. We're approaching a singularity. The more we go away from diversity and the more we just try to hyper focus on this one chemical element, and it doesn't do us any favors, in my opinion.
And it does. really make this competitive pool very small, because now we have talked about.
Can't believe this is still lit. Here, take it. You go. I had two microphones there for a minute.
If there's only 10 strains being grown, what's the levels of quality across the board? And then people are competing for price, or like what's the spectrum? Like what's the
If 10 strains are being grown, what's the justice in, because 5 of those by definition are going to test lower than 5 of those other ones. There's going to be the top 5 and the low 5 if you grew 10 strains, right? What's the justice in all of this work and just awesome product that you've painstakingly curated and grown now being reduced to the same singularity, and half of it being ignored because, well, I don't want low THC. Well, motherfucker, that's not what makes good cannabis. Like, who lied to you and told you that you had to actually make that decision? By all means, whatever you like for breakfast is probably going to have a higher protein content than what you had for dessert. So why would you ever make some kind of value statement about the protein content of a certain meal versus your enjoyment of it? Which that's all we're talking about with cannabis is the experience, right?
You know, you talk about that too, and I think about the market needs to have a maturity rate of consumer knowledge and experiences that come with it, because really they're mostly not exposed to the diversity we've had.
I need you to do something. You've got a mute button on, and I don't know how long your mute has been on for.
Well, that's good to know. Well, hopefully you guys can hear me now.
We're gonna shoot out some other good points here because.
Well, let's keep going.
We're gonna keep this going. Here, hang tight. Yeah, I just saw that going on right now. I guess this watch is pretty good for that. So well, yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, now I know what the red light is for. It means it's on mute.
Brother man, hit me with this. I want to ask you a question, and we're just going to go into here. We're at Hall of Flowers. Things are awesome. And I want to explore some areas of cannabis. So, Boomer, I present the following to you. Cannabis testing labs are required to take 0.35% of a batch. That means that 99.65% of that batch never gets seen by any testing lab. And that 0.35% is randomly selected. Pretty crazy, right?
Right.
So, question to you. What do you think about such a small cross section? You know, really 10 grams for every, or excuse me, 16 grams for every 10 pounds. What is your thought for that small of a cross section and not being able to apply? But obviously do you want us to take more of your weed as a grower? No. So what's your thought about that cross section we take? It's supposed to represent the whole batch. In a lot of ways it does, but is it too big, too small? What do you think?
I mean, when you guys are testing, it's testing for potency, and then you're testing for contamination or pesticides and heavy metals and things that could have a varying trigger levels of failure, right?
That's right.
But let's just discuss how you grow a plant in a giant room. The canopy is never the even level. You have microclimates across the room, and when you harvest, they don't always sort top to bottom. A lot of it's mostly all going in the same batch. It may not be entirely homogenized, but let's just say it's all evenly spread across all those plants, okay? But even your sampler, are they grabbing the big buds, the little buds? And those potency in the buds will vary, which is supposed to be giving you an accurate average, right?
Yeah, I got you.
I think that's the level of accuracy that we're assuming for potency, but for maybe mold, or heavy metals, where certain plants might have been treated differently and grown in a different part of, say, soil or different part of the room. Those things, maybe it's not the best, you're not really going to get the best representation of that crop if it has anything contaminated. So I have hair.
Dirt, let's just call that a version of hotspot. A hotspot of contamination, right? Where the average level of contamination is higher. So now take this idea of a hotspot. This one thing burned beautifully. I'm good though. I'm good. So take the idea of a hotspot of contamination. What's the likelihood that that hotspot of contamination is caught in a 0.35% selection? Not very high,
No,
right?
no.
So let's walk our way through this. How much contamination does there need to be before a lab catches it? And now, if not from a compliance end, and saying from a compliance end, should we take this? I have to imagine that agriculturally, whenever the health department or whomever is presiding over a particular farm or operation in a particular place comes in and says, I'm going to take X number of percent of what you're producing
Right.
to see if it's clean, right? I'm quite sure that it's well under 1%. 0.35% for us probably wasn't randomly derived.
Yeah,
It was,
yeah. It came from some other
somebody
sample.
looked at what was practical and what's
Right.
used across industries and said,
Standard.
okay, this is a standard. Thank you. So this 0.35% probably seems and feels very practical from a compliance end for what we do with cannabis. But we just circled the notion that if you have an issue that's going to eventually grow, but at the moment is not caught when I sample 1/3 of 1% of your crop, how much bigger does it have to get? Is that good? What type of testing do you have to do you think in house in order to avoid that kind of thing and make sure that never ever happens ideally?
I
Or
mean,
did I just blow your mind?
No, I mean no, because you're asking a question that it's more about a risk and reward, right? Like I think immediately about how much cost and prevention I have to put in to mitigate anything contaminating the crop. Now I think of consumer safety mostly is this whole point, right? For me as a consumer, I care about clean cannabis. That's been my whole mission statement. So I just think about, well, a level of acceptability or threshold of what you can spray and what triggers are in place. But for me, it's almost like at one point do the cultivators spend too much in providing the sample or going above and beyond to mitigate that? It takes it to like a lab level of production. And some other states, they test for other things that California doesn't either. So I've seen things that they're saying in other states like, hey, this would fail in our state but not in yours, and similar the trigger levels here. So cultivators knowledge or strains and the processes change by state, so it is a moving target. So for me, I would just worry about it being cost prohibitive. It would be my worry, and I don't know how to answer it directly, but if
I don't think it has a good answer.
I would have to take it to, I like the idea of Tyvek stutes and next to lab level in the grow room, but think about the cost of doing that and making sure that the teams are clean. I mean, if you talk about GMP, that's good manufacturing practices. That's where a lot of these places are ultimately taking their cultivation levels to. But that cost
Good point.
goes up. So then does the consumer actually want to pay that at the end too?
Yeah, that was my one-dimensional point in follow through is that,
That's where
it's
I walked
awesome to be
through.
careful, but it is a risk-reward notion.
Right.
The cost goes up the more certain you are. I think about it in terms of resolution, and not resolution in terms of pixels on picture,
Right.
but pixels still of information, is what I'm going for. And that works, both in terms of time as well as spatially, where you can be pulling samples from and monitoring things. It's a question of what is appropriate. And truth be told, nothing, you're not trying to blow through money or time by putting this stuff together, requiring that it's monitored until it bites you in the ass and you realize that it's an issue. But even then, you mentioned that in different times, different places. You're right, different times of the year for different types of issues typically, and different places for what might have happened and what's sort of haunting an operation or preventing it from going forward, or in any way alluding to this contamination that I'm suggesting could be present, or cold spots of THC that could be present in this study of 1/3 of 1% of an operation. So interesting stuff. Let's I think, for what it's worth, let's wrap on this topic right now. And this has been good, man. Let's work it out. And thank you for joining us at Hall of Flowers. This has been awesome.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.